Good morning, seventh grade. I'm going to try something a little different for you guys. I tried this with eighth grade last week, and it seems like it went pretty well. So I'm going to try this with you guys. I will be screen recording my slideshows, and there will be a quiz on Google Forms after this to verify that you went through this. So today's slideshow is on the characteristics of birds. And I had you guys yesterday either go outside or at least look outside and listen and look at what birds had in common. And some things you might have noticed immediately or like that you can think of off the top of your head would be they all have beaks, they all have wings, they have feathers, they all make chirping sounds. So with that in mind, I just wanted to go a little more in depth about these special animals because they are currently the only animals that can really fly. So the first thing we should talk about is how they're actually pretty similar to reptiles, which we went over the past couple of weeks. The bird and the reptile are both vertebrates, which means that they have a backbone, as you should know. They have feet and legs covered in scales, and then eggs with shells, and amniotic sacs, which is basically just a sac of fluid for the baby to live in and get its food. However, reptiles do not have the feathers, wings, or beaks that a bird typically has. And unlike reptiles, which are exothermic and rely on the environment to keep itself warm or cool, birds are endothermic, which means that they're able to control their own body temperature with internal mechanisms. So the first distinguishing feature of a bird would be its feathers. And as you can see, I have a picture here of a peacock with its beautiful feathers. The function of a feather, well, there's actually many functions of a feather. The first one would be to help the bird stay dry and warm. The second would be to attract mates, as this male peacock is doing here. And the third, obviously, would be to help with flight. There's two types of feathers that assist in these functions. There's the contour feathers and there's the down feathers. Contour feathers are the stiffer feathers that you'll find if you're looking on the ground and you find some feathers. They generally cover the bird's body and the wings. They can be colorful and attract mates, which is what we were looking at with the peacock's contour feathers that it was fluffing up. And the structure of a contour feather is pretty similar across all contour feathers. It has this middle stem called the shaft, which you can see in the diagram. And then the rest of it is called the vane. There's these little offshoots called the vane. And within the vane, you have your barbs. So the whole thing is the vane. The first branch off from the shaft is called the barb. And then the branch offs from the barb are called barbules. So again, you have the middle section called the shaft. Off the shaft comes the vane. The first branch off from the shaft that's part of the vane is called a barb. And then the branch off from the barb is called a barbule. The barbs link together to form a smooth surface. So if you've ever touched a feather that you found on the ground, you'll notice that it's really smooth as well as it's stiff. And they are streamlined so that they can help with flight. So the reason why you want such a stiff and smooth surface is so that flight isn't impaired in any way. This is in contrast to down feathers, which are those fluffy little tufts you might see on the ground as well. They lie close to the bird's body, but notably they're not found on the wings, because their function, unlike contour feathers, is to keep the bird warm. So what the bird will do is it'll fluff its feathers and air will get trapped near the body, and then those down feathers will keep the air in there so that the bird can keep its warmth. There are two general things with feather maintenance. So obviously your bird needs to keep their feathers in good shape so that it can fly well and so that its body can control its temperature. So it does two processes to help with feather maintenance. The first, which is exhibited by the blue bird at the top right, is called preening. There's a special gland in the bird that produces an oil that the bird then uses its beak to spread around the wings. And that oil will keep the feathers waterproof and clean. The second thing, which kind of relates back to incomplete metamorphosis of arthropods, is called molting. So much like how an arthropod sheds its skin and becomes a larger version of itself, or a more adult version of itself as it sheds, the bird will also shed old and worn out feathers for newer feathers. And most birds do this at least once a year so that its feathers continue to function at high qualities. How do birds get their energy? So obviously a bird doesn't have a mouth like us, doesn't have any teeth, instead it has a beak. So what will happen is the beak will get its food, and as you can see, the diet is usually something like insects, nuts, seeds, or meat. But sometimes if like you're a goose, you'll eat grass, leaves, or other plants. But either way, the beak will be adapted in such a way that it can get its dietary source. But the beak is unable to chew the food. So the food first gets stored in the crop of the bird until it goes down to the gizzard of the bird. And the gizzard is where there's like little stones. And those stones kind of do the same thing that our teeth do with your food, where they crush it up into small bits that can then be digested in the intestines. So, birds fly, or at least most of them fly. And many of the birds that are currently flightless have ancestors from, back in the dinosaur age or whatever, that were able to fly. So I want you to take a moment now to just think about what are some examples of adaptations for flight. So maybe the first thing you thought of was, well, eagles like the one shown here and all other birds have wings. And there's special things about wings that we're going to go into in the next few slides, as well as just in the general body structure of the bird. So, these images show a bunch of adaptations for flight that birds have. On the first image on the left, you can see that most birds are gifted with really good eyesight. They usually have large eyes, and it allows the birds to see objects and food from far away. The next thing it points at is the heart. Birds generally have a fast beating heart, and what that helps with is it gets oxygen flowing around your system, much like how our heart will get oxygen flowing around our system. Their heart gets oxygen flowing around their system. But because it beats much faster than ours, they get oxygen a lot quicker. They also have air sacs attached to their lungs, which store air, and the bird then always has a supply of air to breathe. So while it's flying, it doesn't ever really run out of oxygen like how we would. It always has like a little storage compartment of air. The air sac also serves to keep them light. Other things that are important for their body to fly would be their streamlined body shape, which minimizes air resistance, as you can see on the little doodle there. They have hollow bones. So we have bones that have stuff in them. So those are not hollow. Those are filled. But they have hollow bones, which reduces overall body weight and body mass. And so they get to fly easier. A lot of them have a large wingspan, which increases its surface area and gives lifting thrust to the air. there's this idea called lift, where basically if you have a difference in air pressure between the top of your wing and the bottom of your wing, the air pressure difference causes you to lift up easier. And birds also have powerful flight muscles on their chest, which supports them. And these muscles are attached to a large breastbone called the keel, which holds them in place and allows the bird to flap its wings. So the reproduction of birds, it's also internal fertilization. Unlike fish, which do external fertilization, these guys do internal fertilization. Then the birds will lay eggs that have shells around them, but unlike a reptile, which can sort of abandon their eggs if they want to, the birds must keep their eggs warm. And so they will like lay their eggs on a nest, and they will just sit on them until they're ready to hatch, and that's called brooding. And then when they give birth, they can either give birth to what's called a precocial chick or an altricial chick. A precocial chick, which is on the top right with your chickens, they are active as soon as they're hatched and have downy feathers and can basically kind of survive on their own. They just kind of follow mom around. Whereas an altricial chick is weak and helpless after hatching and doesn't have any feathers. So the bottom right there is a hawk chick. That would be an example of an altricial chick that fully relies on mom.